There is a moment in Season 6 of Adventure Time that almost nobody talks about when they talk about this show's philosophy. It happens in The Comet. The Season 6 finale aired June 5th, 2015, storyboarded by Jesse Moynihan and Andy Ristaino. Finn has just fought his way through the body of a cosmic monster, saved a sentient comet from being devoured, and is now floating in space facing a being that has existed since before recorded time. And this being offers him everything, not metaphorically, literally everything. It offers him transcendence, godhood, the dissolution of his physical form into pure cosmic energy, the chance to become something beyond human, beyond limitation, beyond death. The comet calls it a new mode of existence. It says, and this is confirmed in the episode transcript, that Finn can go to the beginning and the end of everything. And Finn says no. He says he's put a lot of effort into his meat existence, and he'd like to see it through. Most viewers read this as Finn choosing love over power, choosing his friends, choosing the simple life he knows over the cosmic unknown he doesn't. And that reading is available. It's even sweet. But here is the reading nobody gives this scene. Here is the one that Friedrich Nietzsche, writing in the 1880s, would have given it immediately. Finn refusing transcendence is not humility. It is not a rejection of power. It is the most complete possible expression of the will to power, the Nietzschean concept that the deepest drive in a conscious being is not survival, not pleasure, not belonging, but the expansion and expression of its own capacity. The will to power, in Nietzsche's framework, is not domination over others. It is the affirmation of life itself, in its particular form, in its particular conditions, against the temptation to escape those conditions into something easier or more abstract or more transcendent. Finn, declining godhood because he wants to keep being Finn, is doing exactly what Nietzsche described when he wrote about the highest form of life affirmation, which would make Finn the Übermensch. And that is where this gets very dark, because the show spends 10 seasons demonstrating, with extraordinary care and specificity, exactly what happens when the Übermensch lives in a world that hasn't caught up with him. Nietzsche's warning was not about the Übermensch specifically. His warning was about what happens when the will to power operates without wisdom, when the capacity for self-creation becomes compulsive rather than chosen, when the refusal to accept external authority slides almost invisibly into the refusal to accept any limits at all. Finn is what Nietzsche warned us about, not because he's evil, because he's almost right. And almost right, at the level of philosophical principle, is where the most specific and most interesting damage gets done. Get comfortable. This is going to be one of the most uncomfortable analyses I've done for this channel, because it requires holding two things simultaneously: that Finn is genuinely heroic, and that the specific shape of his heroism is also a problem. The show knows this. It spent seasons making the case. Subscribe if you haven't. It keeps this channel alive. Now let's start at the beginning. Friedrich Nietzsche was born on October 15th, 1844, in Rücken, Prussia. He died on August 25th, 1900, in Weimar, after a decade of complete mental collapse. In between those two dates, he produced some of the most influential and most misread philosophy in Western history. The misreading is important for our purposes, because the same misreading that turned Nietzsche into a cultural icon associated with toughness and superiority is also the misreading that makes Finn seem like a simple hero rather than the complicated philosophical figure the show actually constructed. The popular version of Nietzsche goes roughly like this: God is dead, nothing matters. The strong should dominate the weak. If you don't feel bad about your choices, you're free. The Übermensch is the goal, and the goal is power. This version is wrong about almost every detail. It is the version that attracted fascists in the 1930s and philosophy undergraduates in every decade since, and Nietzsche himself would have despised it. He was explicitly anti-nationalist, explicitly anti-Semitic, explicitly opposed to the kind of domination politics that later claimed him. What Nietzsche actually wrote in Thus Spoke Zarathustra in 1883 is considerably more interesting and considerably more relevant to Adventure Time. The Übermensch, the Overman, is not a being who dominates others. It is a being who creates values rather than inheriting them. Nietzsche observed that most human beings live according to value systems they received rather than chose: religious morality, cultural norms, the inherited expectations of family and society. These systems work, up to a point, as organizing principles for life. But Nietzsche argued that when the foundations of those systems collapse, when God is dead, when the traditional structures lose their authority, most people simply drift, filling the vacuum with nihilism or with new versions of the old authority dressed in different clothes. The Übermensch is the response to this vacuum, the being who, confronted with the absence of inherited meaning, creates meaning from within, who generates values through the act of living fully, rather than waiting for values to be handed down, who says yes to life, not despite its suffering and its uncertainty and its specific, particular conditions, but through them. The Übermensch does not transcend the human condition. The Übermensch affirms it. And Finn, at his best, does exactly this. Look at how Finn operates throughout the show's early seasons. He does not follow a code handed down by authority. He does not defer to Princess Bubblegum's political judgments, or the Ice King's claims about how things work, or the Lich's philosophy of extinction. He operates from an internal moral compass that is entirely his own, a compass that says, simply, if someone needs help and I can provide it, I will. If something is wrong, I will oppose it. The specific, particular values of Finn the human are not derived from any external source. They emerge from Finn himself, from his specific experience of the world, from the specific things he cares about. This is Nietzsche's value creation. Finn is not following rules. He is being what he is, and what he is generates its own ethics. The opening sequence of Adventure Time, Finn and Jake running through a landscape of ruins and adventure, the show's title appearing over a world built from the aftermath of civilization's collapse, is a Nietzschean image. The old world ended. The Mushroom War destroyed the structures that organized human life for centuries. In the ruins, something new emerged. A boy with his own values, making his own meaning, saying yes to the adventure of existence. That's not an accident. That's the show knowing what it's doing. And here is where Nietzsche's warning becomes relevant, because the will to power, the capacity for self-creation, for value generation, for life affirmation, is not automatically good. It is powerful, and power without the particular kind of wisdom Nietzsche called self-overcoming produces something specific and recognizable and dangerous. It produces Finn in Frost and Fire, Season 5, Episode 30, aired August 5th, 2013. Written and storyboarded by Luke Pearson and Somvele Siophone. 3.009 million viewers, one of the most morally uncomfortable episodes the show ever produced, and deliberately so. Finn is dating Flame Princess. He has a dream in which she fights the Ice King, and the dream is pleasurable in a way that the episode is deliberately coy about. The cosmic owl appears in it, signaling it as prophetic. Finn, unable to let the dream go, forges letters to both Flame Princess and the Ice King, designed to provoke a real-world version of the dream fight. He uses intimate details of Flame Princess's past to write the letter in her voice. He uses things she trusted him with, and it works. The fight happens, and then happens again, larger and more destructive than before. When Flame Princess discovers what Finn did, she doesn't yell, she looks at him, and she hears only the babbling nonsense sound from his dream. The show's specific visual representation of the fact that she can no longer understand him as a person, only as the source of the manipulation. She says she needs time alone. She walks away into the sunset. The Ice King, of all people, delivers the verdict. You blew it, man. The Nietzschean framework for this episode is specific and exact. Nietzsche wrote about what he called ressentiment, not simply resentment, but the specific psychological condition that develops when the will to power is blocked or frustrated and turns inward, becoming reactive rather than creative. The person with ressentiment defines themselves not through what they affirm, but through what they oppose and what they want. They organize their identity around lack rather than abundance. Finn's will to power, in Frost and Fire, has become reactive. He is not creating, he is pursuing. He is not affirming his own values. He is pursuing a specific experiential state, the dream, the feeling, and he is willing to use other people instrumentally to reach it. This is, in Nietzsche's framework, the corruption of the will to power. The moment when self-creation becomes self-serving. The moment when I do what I am becomes I take what I want. And the reason this is the corruption is precise. Finn treats Flame Princess as material for his own experience. He uses her intimate history, the things she told him in trust, the things she shared, because she believed he saw her as a person, as ammunition. He converts her personhood into a tool for his own purposes. Nietzsche is extremely specific about this failure mode. He writes that the person who uses others instrumentally is not exhibiting the will to power. They are exhibiting its absence. Genuine will to power, genuine life affirmation, requires the recognition of the other as a being with their own values, their own will, their own claim on the world. To reduce another person to an instrument is not strength. It is the behavior of someone who is afraid of genuine encounter. Finn is afraid of something in Frost and Fire, not consciously, but the structure of what he does reveals it. He can't just have the relationship he has with Flame Princess. He needs something from her that goes beyond what the relationship provides. And rather than articulate this, rather than actually encounter her as a person and tell her what he wants, he engineers the situation without her knowledge. He avoids the genuine encounter by controlling the circumstances instead. This is the specific Nietzschean failure the show is diagnosing, and it is connected directly to the wound we traced in an earlier video, the abandoned infant who learned that being useful is how you earn presence, that controlling outcomes is how you prevent abandonment. But in this script, I want to go further than the psychological reading, because the philosophical reading is darker and more specific. The Übermensch, in Nietzsche's framework, creates values through genuine engagement with the world, including genuine engagement with other people. The moment you stop genuinely engaging and start engineering, stop encountering and start controlling, you have left the Übermensch behind and entered something closer to what Nietzsche called the last man, the person whose highest ambition is their own comfort and the management of their own experience. Finn is oscillating between these two states across the show's run. At his best, he is the Übermensch, present, open, creating values through genuine encounter. At his worst, he is retreating into control and management, which produces Frost and Fire and produces the Season 6 depression arc. Let me talk about the arm. Because the arm is the show's most specific and sustained physical symbol, and it connects the Nietzschean reading to the show's deepest architecture in a way that I think is underappreciated. In Escape from the Citadel, Season 6, Episode 2, aired April 21st, 2014, storyboarded by Tom Herpich and Steve Wolfhard, Finn meets his father Martin for the first time in memory. Martin, voiced by Stephen Root, is everything the absent father who didn't stay tends to be in imagination: free, charming, irresponsible, fundamentally oriented toward his own survival and pleasure in a way that leaves no room for the child he abandoned. He calls Finn Flynn at one point. He doesn't remember the name. When Martin tries to escape through a portal with the other criminals, Finn holds on. He grabs the shard of the citadel that Martin is riding. He holds it with everything he has, the grass sword taking over his entire arm, amplifying his grip to supernatural strength. He will not let go. He cannot let go, and the shard is pulled away anyway, and the grass sword tears away from his body, and Finn loses his right arm at the shoulder. The arm is lost in the act of refusing to let someone leave. This is not Nietzschean valor. This is ressentiment in its most physical form, the reactive will that defines itself not through what it creates, but through what it refuses to accept, that refuses to accept Martin's departure, that holds on past the point where holding is possible, that loses itself in the holding. Finn's will to power, at this specific moment, has become entirely oriented around another person's choices, rather than his own, and the show is extremely precise about what happens next. The arm grows back, a grass arm, from the sword, and then that arm is eventually lost too. Finn's right arm is a recurring wound across his incarnations. Shoko, his past life, also had a missing arm. The heroism principle, in each of its instantiations, loses the reaching instrument. The arm that extends toward others, that tries to hold on to what is leaving, that reaches past the point of safety into the territory of genuine loss. Nietzsche wrote about the relationship between suffering and the will to power in a way that the show enacts across Finn's arc. He argued that the response to suffering that the Übermensch makes is not to avoid it, or deny it, or transcend it. It is amor fati, love of fate, the acceptance of everything that happened, including the arm, including Martin, including all of it, as the specific path that shaped this specific being, not as good things, not as things to be grateful for, but as things that are genuinely and completely his, that he chooses, rather than merely endures. The show moves Finn toward this across seasons. It takes a long time. It takes the Hall of Egress, and the encounter with Martin in The Visitor, and the comet, and the quiet acceptance that some things will not be resolved by effort, however heroic. The arm that was lost in the act of reaching is eventually replaced by a golden prosthetic, gifted by a wish at the end of the show. The wound is not erased, it is carried differently, but between the loss and the carrying differently, there is the most important philosophical test the show gives Finn, and it is the comet. Let me return to the comet with more precision, because the philosophical stakes of that scene are higher than most analyses register. The comet, voiced by Tig Notaro, is not a villain. It is not offering Finn something sinister. It is offering him genuine transcendence, the dissolution of his particular human form into something larger, something beyond the specific suffering and limitation and joy of being Finn the human. In U, it says, and the episode confirms this, it's not supposed to sound bad. I'm just giving Finn the choice of a new existence, and Finn says no. Nietzsche's Übermensch, as I noted at the opening, is specifically defined by the affirmation of the particular over the universal, the transcendent options in Nietzsche, God, pure reason, universal ethics, abstract meaning, are precisely what the Übermensch declines, not because they're bad, because the specific, particular, embodied experience of this life with these people in these conditions is what the Übermensch affirms. The highest form of life affirmation for Nietzsche is saying, I want this specific, limited, mortal, fallible, embodied existence, not the transcendent alternative. This, Finn says, I want my meat existence. He says, I've put a lot of effort into it, and I'd like to see it through. This is, in Nietzsche's terms, the most complete possible expression of amor fati, and it's what Adventure Time has been building Finn toward across 6 seasons of loss and growth and failure and heroism and manipulation and recovery. The moment when the boy who reflexively helps everyone, who cannot not intervene, who holds on too long to people who are leaving, that boy chooses, consciously, freely, from a position of genuine understanding, to stay in the specific, difficult, imperfect life he has. And he says it quietly, without a speech. He says, I've put a lot of effort into my meat existence, and I'd like to see it through. And the comet is content with that, and Martin takes the offer instead, and Finn goes home with Jake. Martin taking the transcendence offer is the counterpoint. Martin, who spent his life oriented entirely toward his own survival and freedom, who never chose to stay with anything or anyone, who used his charm to manage situations rather than genuinely engage with them. Martin finds transcendence appealing because he has spent his whole life already treating the specific, particular, embodied world as provisional. The next thing is always better than this thing. The next dimension, the next escape. When a cosmic being offers him a genuinely new mode of existence, Martin doesn't hesitate. He says, start the engine. This is Nietzsche's last man, reaching his logical conclusion. The being who was never willing to fully commit to any particular thing, who organized his life around the maintenance of options, who protected himself from genuine encounter by staying always slightly in motion. When given the chance to be done with the whole business of specificity and commitment and presence, he takes it gladly. And Finn watches his father disappear and feels something complicated that the show is honest enough to not resolve neatly. He's disappointed that Martin is going again, and then he finds something. The recognition that Martin was always going to go, that this specific departure is simply the largest, most complete version of the departure that has defined Martin's entire life. Martin is glad, the episode notes, that they finally understand each other, and in some sense they do. Finn understands what Martin is, and that understanding is both loss and release. This is the most Nietzschean moment in the show, the acceptance of what is, including the father's departure, including the absence that shaped Finn's entire personality, including all the reaching and holding on, and arm losing, that flowed from that original inscription, the acceptance of all of it as the specific path that produced this specific being who is standing here, right now, choosing to stay in his meat existence instead of transcending it. Amor fati, love of fate, not happiness, not resolution, not the absence of grief, the willingness to say, yes, this is mine. Now let me complicate this, because the show complicates it. The danger of the Nietzschean reading of Finn is that it makes him too clean. It makes the arc look like a progress narrative. Boy starts with heroic will, encounters corruption, loses arm, finds amor fati, becomes Übermensch, credits. And the show is too honest for that, because Finn's will to power, even at its best, carries within it the specific seed of the problem. Here is what I mean. Finn cannot not help people. This is his defining characteristic. It appears in the pilot, and it never leaves. He cannot walk past a problem. He cannot allow a crisis to unfold without throwing himself into it. This quality produces extraordinary heroism across 10 seasons. Hundreds of people helped, dozens of catastrophes averted. A world measurably better because Finn existed in it. It also produces Frost and Fire. It produces the Martin arm loss. It produces the Hall of Egress, that episode being, in part, about a boy who cannot stop trying to solve problems even when the trying is itself the problem, who must literally blind himself to make progress, who wears blindfolds and strips off his identity and walks alone across because the helpers in his life keep interfering with his own process. The will to power, in Finn's case, was installed at the level of reflex before it was claimed as choice. He did not decide to be the hero. He was shaped into the hero by specific circumstances: the abandoned infant, the found family, the world that needed helping, the specific way Joshua and Margaret raised him, the specific way worked, and the heroism became his identity before he had the philosophical apparatus to examine whether he was choosing it or whether it was choosing him. Nietzsche is very specific about this distinction. Self-overcoming, the path of the Übermensch, requires not just the will to power, but the capacity to examine and critique that will. The Übermensch creates values, but creation requires distance from instinct. It requires the ability to step back from your own patterns of behavior and ask, is this what I choose, or is this what I cannot help doing? Finn, for most of the show's run, cannot help doing it. He cannot not help. The heroism is not chosen, it is compelled, and the show, particularly in seasons 5 and 6, is interested in what happens when the compulsive hero runs out of problems to solve in the right way, when the compulsion leads him somewhere wrong, when the inability to not intervene produces harm rather than help. Frost and Fire is that. The inability to not pursue the experience he wants leads him to engineer a situation that uses two people instrumentally, destroys a relationship, and leaves him standing in the ruins of the Ice Kingdom, while the Ice King offers him the most accurate verdict the show ever delivers. You blew it, man. The compulsive heroism and the compulsive manipulation are the same mechanism expressing itself in different situations. The will to power, uncriticized, the will to power operating at the level of reflex rather than choice, is equally capable of producing either one. This is Nietzsche's warning. Not that will to power is bad. That will to power without self-overcoming produces the specific failure the show documents in Finn's worst moments. Self-overcoming, in Nietzsche's framework, is the hardest thing. It requires you to take the specific capacity that makes you who you are. In Finn's case, the heroic will, the inability to not act, the affirmation of life through intervention, and subject it to the same critical examination you would subject anything else to. It requires you to ask whether you are using this capacity because it is right or because you cannot stop. The Hall of Egress is where Finn comes closest to this, and it is the episode I want to spend the most time with now. Season 7, Episode 24, aired March 5th, 2016, storyboarded entirely by Tom Herpich, nominated for an Emmy, and I think it is the most Nietzschean episode of Adventure Time, more than The Comet, more than any of the philosophy episodes, because it is about the specific experience of self-overcoming from the inside. Before you know you're doing it, Finn enters a cave. He finds a door. The door can only be passed by closing his eyes. Every time he opens his eyes, he resets, both physically and temporally, the wiki confirms. His mind is sent back to when he closed them. He tries to escape with his eyes closed. He makes it out. Jake opens his eyes. Reset. He tries again. Different attempt. Reset. He starts wearing blindfolds. He strips off his clothing and his backpack, anything that carries identifying threads. He walks alone, blind, across for what the show implies is months. Here is the Nietzschean reading of this episode that I haven't heard anyone articulate. The Hall of Egress is the show's physical representation of the self-overcoming process. The thing Finn needs to do to escape, close his eyes, move forward without seeing, trust the process without being able to verify it, is exactly the thing his heroic will makes impossible. The heroic will is oriented toward the world. It intervenes. It opens its eyes. It looks at the situation and engages. Every time Finn's heroic instinct asserts itself, every time someone forces his eyes open, or he opens them in response to something in the environment, he resets. The escape requires him to temporarily, deliberately, set aside the thing that defines him, to stop being Finn the hero, the being who looks at problems and acts on what he sees, and to be something more fundamental, a being moving forward in darkness, trusting not vision but direction. This is self-overcoming, not the destruction of the self, not the denial of the will, the voluntary suspension of its most reflexive expression in service of something the will itself wants but cannot achieve through its usual methods. The strips off everything detail. Finn removes his iconic hat, the most recognizable element of his visual identity. He removes his clothes. He removes his backpack. which contains the tools of his heroism. He keeps only his body and the animal skin tunic he fashions, and the multiple blindfolds, and his own movement. He is, at this moment, the least heroically equipped Finn has ever been, and this is when he escapes. He exits the hall of egress, and immediately encounters a second hall of egress, a cave that requires him to open his eyes rather than close them. The thing that destroyed him in the first hall is the thing that frees him in the second. The self-overcoming wasn't the closure of the eyes, it was learning to distinguish between moments that require closure and moments that require opening, learning to examine the reflexive response, keep eyes closed, don't look, and recognize when it applies and when it doesn't. He opens his eyes, he escapes. Jake says, "That must have been some cave." Finn says, "No comment, no comment." The self-overcoming that happened in there, the months of walking blind, the stripping away of every external identifier, the learning to move without looking, cannot be narrated into a form that fits the conversational context. It is simply something that happened, that Finn now carries, that made him capable of something he couldn't do before. This is the show's most precise portrait of the Nietzschean process. Not dramatic, not announced. A boy walked into a cave, stripped everything off, walked blind for months, and came out changed in a way he can't quite explain and won't try to. The adventure continues. He says no comment, and they go on. Nietzsche wrote in The Gay Science, "The secret for harvesting from existence, the greatest fruitfulness, and the greatest enjoyment is to live dangerously." He meant something specific by dangerous. He didn't mean physically dangerous, though that's one expression. He meant existentially dangerous, the willingness to genuinely risk your sense of yourself, to allow the experiences that challenge your identity rather than avoiding them, to live in a way that could actually change you. The hall of egress is existentially dangerous. Finn walks in expecting a dungeon and emerges from something much more threatening than any monster, the suspension of his own capacity for heroic vision. He lives, for months, without the thing that makes him Finn, and he comes out the other side with something the cave has taught him that he didn't have before. This is the Nietzschean path, not the dramatic transformation, the slow, private, undisclosed change that produces someone capable of different choices than before. Now, the ressentiment problem. Because the show is not only diagnosing Finn's heroism as will to power, it is also tracking the specific way ressentiment operates in his life. And this is the part that connects to Nietzsche's warning most directly. Nietzsche described ressentiment as the reactive orientation that develops when a being with genuine will to power cannot express it directly. The blocked will turns inward, becomes defined by what it opposes rather than what it creates, generates elaborate justifications for the reactive behavior that dress it up as something more dignified. Finn's relationship to his father is the show's extended portrait of ressentiment. The episode The Tower, Season 6, Episode 9, aired October 2nd, 2014, shows Finn building an enormous candy tower, higher and higher, reaching towards space. He is, at some level, trying to reach his father. He is, at another level, trying to build high enough to punch his father and take his arm as revenge. He is organizing an enormous amount of creative energy, building, reaching, climbing, around a reactive impulse. The tower is creative. The impulse behind it is ressentiment. PB eventually tells him, after bringing him down from the tower, that his anger is going to eat him alive if he lets it organize his life. And Finn asks, "Then what do I do with it?" This is the question Nietzsche asked. And the answer Nietzsche gave is not forgiveness, not in the conventional moral sense. The answer is something harder. The answer is, use the energy of what happened, including the anger, including the loss, but use it for creation rather than reaction. Channel the blocked will outward rather than letting it organize around the wound. Finn eventually does this, not immediately. Season 6 is the show's most sustained portrait of what happens when ressentiment gets the better of Finn's will to power. The frost and fire manipulation, the tower, the depression arc, the numbness, and then slowly, across seasons 7 through 10, the channel shifts. The energy of what happened to Finn, the absent father, the arm, the accumulated losses, begins to produce something rather than just react to something. He becomes, very quietly, someone capable of the comet moment, someone capable of saying, "I've put a lot of effort into my meat existence, and I'd like to see it through." That sentence is Nietzsche's, that choice is Nietzsche's, and the path that leads to it, the ressentiment, the reactive phase, the tower, the hall of egress, the gradual self-overcoming, that path is the show's most sustained philosophical argument about what it takes to get from the reflexive will to power to the chosen, affirmative, amor fati version. Not every viewer sees this. Most people who watch Adventure Time see a heroic boy having adventures, and that reading is available. And it's not wrong. Finn is heroic. The adventures are real. The warmth between Finn and Jake is real. The help he provides to hundreds of beings across 10 seasons is real. But Adventure Time was never satisfied with the surface reading. It built a show that could be watched as a children's adventure cartoon, and simultaneously as one of the most sophisticated animated examinations of Nietzschean philosophy in any medium, not by putting Nietzsche's words in Finn's mouth, not by having characters lecture about the will to power, but by building a character whose arc traces the precise path from reflexive will to power through ressentiment, and ressentiment's specific damages through the self-overcoming process, through amor fati, the arm, the tower, the hall of egress, the comet. And the thing that makes this Nietzsche's warning, rather than Nietzsche's celebration, is this. Most people watching the show in its early seasons didn't see the problem coming. Finn looked like the answer. Finn looked like what heroism should be: genuine, wholehearted, completely committed, completely open. He looked like the Übermensch in uncomplicated form. And then Frost and Fire happened, and the arm happened, and the tower happened, and suddenly Finn is the show's most uncomfortable character, rather than its most straightforwardly admirable one, because the thing that made him heroic, the reflexive, total, unstoppable will to power, expressed through heroism, is also the thing that makes him capable of using Flame Princess's intimate history as ammunition. The same force, different channel. This is the warning. Not that Finn is bad, not that heroism is bad, that the will to power without self-examination, without the self-overcoming that turns reflex into choice, produces both the heroism and the frost and fire in the same mechanism. And you can't get the heroism without the risk of the frost and fire. You can only do what the show eventually shows Finn doing. Walk into enough caves, strip off enough of your identifying markers, walk blind long enough until you can distinguish between when to close your eyes and when to open them. Adventure Time understood this more precisely than most philosophical texts written for adults, not because it set out to illustrate Nietzsche, because it set out to tell the truth about what a heroic person actually looks like from the inside, the fullness of it, the complications of it, the specific ways the best qualities produce the specific worst moments, and the specific path from the worst moments back towards something livable. Finn is what Nietzsche warned us about. He is the will to power at full strength. He is the amor fati in its most sincere expression. He is the ressentiment when the will is blocked. He is the self-overcoming when the cave is deep enough and dark enough, and he's been walking long enough. He is, in other words, a person, the most philosophically complete portrait of a person that Adventure Time ever produced. Wrapped in a white hat and a sword and a talking dog and candy kingdoms and 10 seasons of adventures in a world built from the ruins of everything that came before. The comet offered him transcendence. He said no. He said he'd put a lot of effort into his meat existence, and he'd like to see it through. That is the answer. That is the whole argument. Finn, walking back to Oo, back to Jake, back to the specific, imperfect world he lives in, saying no to the universal and yes to the particular. That is Nietzsche's highest form of life affirmation, enacted by a cartoon boy at the end of a season that nearly broke him. He blew it with Flame Princess. He lost his arm to Martin. He walked blind through Oo for months. He stood in front of a cosmic being and said, "No thank you, I'll stay here." And then he went home, and the adventures continued. Thank you for spending all of this time tonight. Subscribe if you haven't. Come back whenever you need to. The world is complicated, and the philosophy of cartoons about boys with swords is one of the better ways I know to think about it. Good night. Expansion. A. The will to power. In Finn's early seasons. Let me go deeper into the early seasons, because the Nietzschean reading requires establishing the baseline before we can fully appreciate what goes wrong. Pendleton Ward premiered Adventure Time on April 5th, 2010, with Slumber Party Panic and Trouble in Lumpy Space. From the very first episode, Finn's will to power is operating at full strength. Slumber Party Panic is about Finn keeping a secret to protect the Candy People from exploding from fear. What's philosophically interesting about this episode is not the secret itself, but the quality of Finn's decision-making. He doesn't consult an external authority. He doesn't apply a rule. He makes a judgment in real time based on his assessment of what the situation requires, and then he acts on it. This is what Nietzsche means by value creation. The person who applies inherited rules is a rule follower. The person who generates responses directly from their engagement with the situation, without the intermediary of a rule system, is creating values. Finn, at 12 years old, in the first episode of the show, is already doing this. He doesn't think, what would the hero rulebook say? He thinks, what does this specific situation require? And then he does that. The show reinforces this across its first 3 seasons in dozens of small moments. Finn helping a creature that everyone else considers a monster. Finn refusing to follow PB's political instructions when they conflict with his direct moral assessment. Finn defying the Cosmic Owl's apparent warning because he has decided, based on his own judgment, that the right thing is the right thing, regardless of cosmic consequences. This last one, the Cosmic Owl's role in Finn's decision-making, is worth extended attention. The Cosmic Owl appears in premonition dreams throughout the series. Its presence marks a dream as prophetic. In conventional moral frameworks, the appearance of a divine messenger bearing prophetic information should produce deference. The mortal receiving the prophecy should attempt to understand and comply with whatever fate the prophecy describes. Finn doesn't work this way. When the Cosmic Owl's presence in a dream suggests that something is meant to happen, Finn's response is not to ask, how do I align with this fate? It's to ask, what do I think about this fate? He does not defer to the cosmic. He evaluates it with the same direct moral assessment he applies to everything else. This is, in Nietzsche's framework, the Übermensch relationship to fate. Not submission and not rebellion, but genuine engagement, taking the information as data rather than as authority, processing it through the same value creation faculty that processes everything else. The Übermensch does not obey fate. The Übermensch encounters fate and responds to it as a free being. The problem that Frost and Fire reveals is that this quality, the genuine freedom from external authority, the direct value creation, the encounter rather than deference, is not inherently oriented toward good outcomes. It is powerful. Power is not morality. The same quality that makes Finn capable of defying cosmic authority when defiance is right also makes him capable of using Flame Princess's intimate history as manipulation material when his desire overrides his judgment. The early seasons present this as almost entirely positive. Finn says yes to everything, intervenes in everything, helps with everything, and for 3 seasons, the show doesn't fully interrogate the cost of this quality. It celebrates it. Finn is the hero. The hero helps. Everything is better when the hero helps. Season 5 begins the interrogation. It doesn't announce it. It just starts placing Finn in situations where the direct, interventionist will, the quality that was celebrated for 3 seasons, produces something other than simple heroism. The All the Little People episode, Season 5, Episode 5, aired November 26th, 2012, is the earliest and most explicit version of this. Finn finds a tiny bag of miniature versions of the OO characters. He starts manipulating their relationships for his own interest. He makes the little Finn date the little PB. He makes little versions of characters interact in ways that serve his curiosity, and it escalates. The more he manipulates, the more complex and destructive the consequences become. The episode ends with Finn traumatized by what he's done, and the tiny magic man who owns the bag looks at him and says, "You played with their lives for your own amusement, right? Welcome to the club, pal." The club, presumably, contains powerful beings who use lesser beings as instruments. The club contains people with the will to power, and without the self-examination to orient it correctly. The club is not a good place to be, and then Frost and Fire takes this setup and makes it personal. The little people were strangers. Flame Princess is someone Finn loves. The manipulation was distant and abstract. The forged letters use her specific intimate history. The show escalates from the prototype of the problem to the version that costs something real. The AV Club review of Frost and Fire called it one of the reviewers' favourite kinds of Adventure Time episode because it is a metaphor that speaks to the difficulty of growing up while embracing the unbridled fun of being a kid. That's true, and it's also slightly too gentle. The episode is not primarily about the difficulty of growing up. It's about the specific way a person whose most powerful quality is also their most dangerous quality produces harm when that quality operates without examination. Finn is growing up. But growing up in his case means developing the capacity to examine the thing that makes him Finn, the unstoppable will, the inability to not act, and ask whether it is operating in service of his genuine values or in service of something smaller and more reactive. That capacity doesn't arrive all at once. It arrives in stages, across years of story, through the arm and the tower, and the hall of egress, and the comet. Expansion. B. The ressentiment arc in detail. Let me trace the ressentiment arc in detail, because it's the most sustained piece of Nietzschean philosophy the show produces, and it runs from Escape from the Citadel through to the end of Season 6. Nietzsche's ressentiment. He used the French word specifically, because it carries connotations the German resentment doesn't, is not simple resentment. It is the specific psychological configuration that develops when a being with genuine creative will to power has that will blocked or redirected. The creative will, denied its outward expression, turns inward and becomes reactive. It begins to define itself through opposition. It generates elaborate narratives about the external obstacles that are preventing its expression. And crucially, it converts these narratives into a kind of identity. The self becomes the one who was wronged by X, rather than the one who creates Y. Martin's departure in Escape from the Citadel aired April 21st, 2014. Arm confirmed lost when the Citadel shard is pulled away and the grass sword tears off, is the triggering event for Finn's ressentiment arc. Martin's departure is not a new wound. The original abandonment happened when Finn was a baby, but this departure is the first time Finn can witness it directly, consciously, as an adult capable of processing what it means. And what Martin's departure in this episode represents is specifically the thing that ressentiment produces around, the confirmation that the will to power, even at maximum expression, Finn holds on with grass sword amplified supernatural strength, is not sufficient to prevent the thing you most want to prevent. Finn holds on with everything he has. Martin leaves anyway. The arm is the price of the holding. Ressentiment begins here. The blocked will, the will that held on and was still insufficient, does not simply dissolve. It reorganizes. It begins building the self around the experience of the block. The wound becomes identity. I am the boy whose father left becomes the organizing principle, generating reactive behaviors that look like action, but are actually responses to the wound, rather than expressions of the will. The Tower, Season 6, Episode 9, aired October 2nd, 2014. Finn builds an enormous tower. He is reaching upward. He says he wants to go to space to find Martin and take his arm as revenge. The tower is creative. It's an enormous construction. It takes effort and problem solving and genuine skill. But the motivation is pure ressentiment. He's not building the tower because he wants to build it. He's building it because he can't process what happened. And building is a way of directing the energy of the blocked will outward without actually engaging the wound. PB eventually talks him down. She explains what he's actually doing, and Finn asks, "Then what do I do with it?" He doesn't have an answer yet. The show doesn't provide one immediately. This is accurate. Nietzsche's path from ressentiment to amor fati is not a short one. It requires specific experiences, the hall of egress kind of experiences, the kind where you walk blind for months and discover something about your own will that you couldn't have discovered any other way. The Season 6 depression arc, Breezy, Dentist, the various episodes where Finn is numb and going through motions, is the show's portrait of passive nihilism. Nietzsche defines passive nihilism as the response to blocked will that collapses inward rather than converting to ressentiment. The person gives up on affirming anything. They drift. They find stimulation without meaning. Finn going on dates with princesses he doesn't care about, trying to find something that makes him feel. It's not ressentiment at this point. It's the aftermath of ressentiment, when the reactive phase has exhausted itself and there's nothing left. And then the comet arc begins, and the hall of egress is in the middle of it. And eventually Finn stands in front of a cosmic being and is asked the question that all of this has been preparation for. What do you want? Not what do you want to do? Not what is the right thing? What do you want? What, for yourself, genuinely, as the specific being you are, do you want? And Finn says, my meat existence. I want my meat existence. That's the answer. That's the end of ressentiment and the beginning of amor fati. The move from I am the boy whose father left to I am the being who has put a lot of effort into this specific existence and wants to see it through. The self, defined by what it affirms rather than by what was done to it. It doesn't erase the father. It doesn't resolve the wound. It changes the organizing principle from reaction to creation, from the wound as identity to the choice as identity. Nietzsche called this the hardest thing a person can do. Adventure Time showed it in 11-minute episodes over 6 seasons, and almost nobody described it as Nietzschean philosophy, because it was wrapped in candy colors and a talking dog and a boy losing his arm in space. But that's exactly what it is. Expansion, see, the eternal return, and Finn's reincarnations. Nietzsche's eternal return is the thought experiment that he considered the heaviest idea a human being could carry. Imagine that your life repeats exactly, in every detail, forever. Could you say yes to it? Not as an intellectual position, but as a genuine, felt affirmation. Could you will the eternal repetition of your specific life? Adventure Time makes this question literal. Finn is a reincarnated being. The show establishes this with increasing specificity as the seasons progress. The Vault, Season 5, Episode 34, aired September 16th, 2013, reveals his past lives through BMO's hypnotic regression program. A comet, a pink blob, Shoko, the one-armed thief. The comet reveals that Finn's blue incarnation as a catalyst comet brought life to Earth. The heroism principle has been instantiated multiple times in multiple bodies across enormous spans of time. This is not, in the show's metaphysics, a comforting fact. The past lives are not resources for Finn. He cannot access their wisdom directly. He carries them as vault items, locked away in his subconscious, surfacing in nightmares, or through hypnosis, or in the moments when the hall of egress requires him to strip everything off and find what remains underneath. The accumulated weight of multiple existences, inaccessible but present. Nietzsche's eternal return asks, can you say yes to the repetition? Can you will the same life again? The question assumes a single life. Adventure Time has Finn facing a more complex version. Can you say yes to the iteration? Can you will the same principle, the heroism principle, the affirmation of life through service, to instantiate again, in a new body, facing new versions of the same fundamental challenges? The show's answer, delivered in Together Again, the 2021 HBO Max special, is yes. Finn and Jake, dying in the special's far future, choose to reincarnate together. The specific beings are gone. The relationship persists in the new forms of Shermie and Beth. The heroism principle returns, but the eternal return question has a darker version. Can you say yes to the arm? Can you say yes to Martin? Can you say yes to the hall of egress and the blindfolded months and the frost and fire and every specific thing that happened in this specific lifetime, knowing you cannot access the wisdom of Shoko or the comet or the pink blob? The answer the show gives is the same answer Finn gives the comet. I've put a lot of effort into my meat existence, and I'd like to see it through. Not because it's been good, all of it, because it's mine, because the specific accumulation of choices and losses and arm losings and tower buildings and hall of egress walkings is what produced this being who stands here now, capable of saying yes to staying. This is amor fati applied to the eternal return, the willingness to say yes to everything, not as endorsement, but as ownership. This happened to me. I am what it made. I choose to continue being what it made, rather than escaping into something that requires less of me. And if this seems abstract, go back to the comet scene and look at Finn's face when he refuses. He's not happy. He's not relieved. He's not triumphant. He's just there, present, choosing this. The specific, complicated, difficult, wonderful, arm-losing, father-abandoning, flame princess manipulating, hall of egress walking, Jake-loving, adventuring existence he has, without revision, without escape. That's the eternal return answered. That's Nietzsche's hardest question responded to by a cartoon boy in space. Expansion. D. The herd morality question, and Finn's relationship to Odin's moral framework. Nietzsche distinguished between two types of morality: master morality and slave morality. Master morality originates from a position of power and strength. It defines good as what the strong being affirms, and bad as what is low and weak. Slave morality originates from a position of weakness and resentment. It defines good as what protects the weak from the strong, and evil as what the strong do to the weak. The evil in slave morality is, Nietzsche argued, derived from resentment of master morality. It is ressentiment made into ethics. Now, Finn's morality. On the surface, Finn appears to be operating from master morality. He is physically strong, psychologically brave, capable of facing anything. His ethics don't originate from resentment. He helps because helping is what the strong can do for the less strong, not because he fears the alternative. But here's the complication the show introduces slowly and carefully. Finn's morality is not self-generated in the way master morality requires. It is inherited from a specific context. The post-Mushroom War world, the specific moral framework that Joshua and Margaret modelled for him, the specific role of hero that the world of has available for a human boy with a sword. When Finn says he wants to be a hero, he is not creating a value. He is accepting an available identity. The identity fits him. It resonates with his genuine will to power, but it is not chosen from scratch. It is received from the context and then filled with genuine feeling. This is the show's most subtle philosophical argument, and it's the one that the comet resolves. The question the comet is asking, underneath the transcendence offer, is being a hero in your chosen identity or your inherited one? Do you want this life because it's yours, or because it's the available slot for what you are? And Finn's answer, I've put a lot of effort into my meat existence, is the answer that closes this question. Not, I was born to be a hero. Not, this is my role. Not any version of the inherited identity. Just, I've been in this. I've built this. The effort I've put into it is mine, and I want to see what it amounts to. That's master morality genuinely claimed, not inherited, chosen. The identity that was available to him, filled with genuine effort over years of genuine living, claimed as his own, rather than simply occupied. The Nietzschean warning around this: most people who occupy available identities, hero, helper, protector, leader, never have the comet moment, never face the question directly. They live in the inherited identity all the way through, mistaking occupation for creation. They think they are choosing because the identity fits, but fitting is not choosing. Finn is given the comet moment. The question is made explicit, in the clearest possible terms, by a cosmic being who has existed since before time. Do you actually want this? Or do you just not want the alternative? And Finn's answer is the show's specific claim about what genuine identity looks like. It's not a declaration of inherent purpose. It's an acknowledgement of accumulated effort and the will to continue. I've been building this. I want to keep building. That's the difference between the Übermensch and everyone else in Nietzsche's framework. Not power, not intelligence, not cosmic significance. The willingness to claim what you've been doing as what you choose, rather than what you simply haven't escaped yet. Expansion, the master morality problem, and Finn's treatment of villains. There's another dimension of the Nietzschean reading that doesn't get discussed. Finn's treatment of the villains in his world. Nietzsche's critique of conventional morality is that it requires the strong to treat the weak and the dangerous with the same consideration. It flattens the moral distinction between genuine strength and genuine weakness. And Finn, operating from what looks like master morality, actually often does the opposite of what Nietzsche's master morality requires. Finn has compassion for the Ice King in ways that Master Morality would find inexplicable. The Ice King is weak, pathetic, repeatedly defeated. Master Morality would say he's beneath consideration. But Finn, particularly as the show deepens, treats the Ice King with a specific kind of care that is neither condescension nor simple tolerance. He has compassion for Simon, even through the Ice King persona. He understands, at some level, that what he is dealing with is a man who lost everything to a curse, not simply a villain to be defeated. This is not Master Morality. This is something Nietzsche's framework doesn't quite have room for. And the fact that Adventure Time generates it through Finn is interesting. The compassion is not slave morality either. Slave morality's compassion is resentment turned into protection. Finn's compassion for the Ice King doesn't come from resentment of the Ice King's power. It comes from genuine perception of Simon's situation. This is what Nietzsche's philosophy often struggles with, the possibility of genuine compassion that originates from strength rather than weakness. Schopenhauer had it. Nietzsche rejected Schopenhauer and rejected compassion as a value. Adventure Time sides with Schopenhauer, and this is the specific way in which Finn is not entirely the Nietzschean figure I've been describing. He is primarily operating with a will to power that Nietzsche would recognize, but he is also capable of a compassion that Nietzsche would find suspicious. And that is, in fact, one of the things that makes Finn genuinely heroic rather than simply powerful. The show's position, I think, is that will to power plus compassion, not despite each other, but because of each other, is the actual ideal. Finn's will to power is what makes him capable of genuine encounter with others. His compassion is what makes that encounter genuine rather than instrumental. Together, they produce someone who can help the Ice King without condescending to him, who can see Simon in the Ice King without the Ice King knowing, who can carry that specific love across seasons of relationship. This is where Adventure Time goes beyond Nietzsche's framework rather than simply illustrating it. Nietzsche's Übermensch creates values, Finn creates values, and then also feels them, not as abstract principles, but as genuine attachments, genuine loves, genuine griefs. The will to power in Finn is always in relationship with his love for specific people, and that love modifies and informs the will in ways that Nietzsche's framework doesn't quite predict, which is perhaps the show's deepest philosophical contribution. Not that Nietzsche was wrong, but that will to power, without love for particular others, produces something like what Nietzsche describes, and will to power with that love produces something slightly different and better, something that can refuse transcendence to stay with Jake, that can see Simon in the Ice King, that can say no comment about the Hall of Egress, and then go home to the people it loves. That's not Nietzsche's Übermensch. It's something the show constructed from Nietzsche's materials and then extended beyond them. And the extension is, I think, the reason the show still matters to so many people who have never read a word of Nietzsche, but who recognize something in Finn's journey that felt true about what it means to grow up and choose your life. Expansion. The warning in specific terms. Let me be direct about what Nietzsche's warning is and why Finn embodies it specifically. Nietzsche's warning is not about strong people. It's not about heroic people. It's about people with genuine will to power who live in a world that doesn't have the philosophical vocabulary to understand what they are. The world sees, strong boy, helps people, fights evil. The world does not see, being whose deepest capacity is the creation of values through direct engagement, whose reflexive expression of that capacity can become manipulation without anyone, including himself, noticing the transition. The warning is this: a being with genuine will to power, operating in a world that has a slot for hero and fills it with this being, will receive consistent positive reinforcement for the expression of will to power in heroic form. The help is celebrated, the fighting is celebrated, the intervention is celebrated. And because the positive reinforcement comes consistently, the being never faces the question of whether the intervention is chosen or compelled. whether the heroism is expression or reflex, until it produces something that can't be celebrated. Frost and fire cannot be celebrated. The forged letters, the manipulation, the use of intimate details, these cannot be framed as heroism. They are the same will to power, expressed without the usual heroic justification, and suddenly visible for what they are when the justification is removed. And here is the warning's specific bite. If the world had been better equipped to understand what Finn is, it would have given him the philosophical vocabulary to examine his own will before the frost and fire moment. It would have had available to him something like Nietzsche's concept of self-overcoming, the capacity to step back from the thing that makes you you and ask, is this chosen or compelled? Instead, the world of ooh celebrated the expression of will until the expression produced harm, and then Finn had to find his own path through the hall of egress, alone, with no map, because nobody had given him the vocabulary. This is the warning, not that Finn is dangerous, that a culture which celebrates the expression of a quality without providing the vocabulary to examine that quality will eventually encounter the quality in a form that can't be celebrated. And the person who has been celebrated for the quality, suddenly confronted with its uncelebrated expression, has no tools, because the tools were never provided. Adventure Time is, in part, a story about a boy who had to build his own tools, who walked into enough caves and stripped off enough identifying markers, and walked blind long enough to arrive at something that functioned like Nietzsche's self-overcoming without ever having encountered the concept directly. That's both the heroism and the warning. He made it, but he had to make it alone, with no map, through years of specific damage and specific recovery. The warning is that not everyone makes it. Not everyone has the hall of egress to walk into, the specific cave that forces the specific suspension of the reflexive will. Some people's reflexive will to power just keeps finding heroic channels, or when it can't find heroic channels, it finds destructive ones. And nobody, not the culture, not the being themselves, ever quite understands what happened. Finn is what Nietzsche warned us about because Finn made it. He found the cave. He walked blind. He said no to the comet, and yes to his meat existence. The warning is about all the Finns who didn't find the cave, who are still building towers toward absent fathers, still forging letters to make their partners fight, still holding on past the point where holding is possible, losing the arm in the act of reaching, unable to understand what's happening because the culture that celebrated their heroism never gave them the words. That's the warning. Finn is the lucky version, the version who had the hall of egress, and Jake and BMO, and the specific cosmic circumstances of a world where the catalyst comet comes and asks directly, what do you want? Most people don't get asked directly. The question arrives obliquely, in consequence rather than in cosmic offer. And without the vocabulary, the answer often isn't, I want my meat existence. The answer is, I don't know. I never asked. I was always too busy helping. Expansion G, the show's final statement about Finn. Let me talk about the finale and the flash forward, because the show's final statement about Finn is specifically Nietzschean and specifically matters for everything we've discussed. The series finale, Come Along With Me, aired September 3rd, 2018. The closing sequence is a flash forward to the far future. Shermie and Beth, a young boy and a young girl in a world that is recognizably ooh, but changed. 1,000 years further along, they meet BMO, who tells them the story of Finn and Jake. They find Finn's arm, the golden prosthetic, and Jake's love letter to Lady Rainicorn. They put them on and take a heroic pose that mirrors the show's opening image. The adventures continue, not with Finn and Jake, with Shermie and Beth. The principle continues. The specific instantiation passes. This is the eternal return answered at the level of the story itself. Not Finn specifically repeating, the heroism principle repeating, the specific quality, the will to power expressed as genuine life affirmation expressed as service to others, recurring in new forms, in new bodies, in a new time. And Finn himself? The show doesn't show us Finn's death, it shows us his arm, which is now a relic, and it shows us the pose Shermie and Beth strike with it, the same pose Finn and Jake struck at the opening of the show, 10 seasons of adventuring ago. The pose is the answer. The specific bodies change. The pose persists. The attitude toward the world, open, ready, committed, saying yes to the adventure, persists across the specific beings who instantiate it. In Together Again, the 2021 Distant Lands special, we see adult Finn's life and his death, and we see him and Jake choosing to reincarnate together. The choice to return, to instantiate again, in new bodies, as Shermie and Beth, is the most complete possible expression of amor fati. Not just willingness to repeat this life, but willingness to return to the conditions that make this kind of life possible, to the world of adventure and service and arm losing and hall of egress walking. Yes to all of it, again. Nietzsche's eternal return is a test of whether you genuinely affirm life or merely tolerate it. The being who can say yes to the eternal repetition has genuinely affirmed. Finn and Jake choosing to return, choosing the world with all its specific difficulty and all its specific wonder, is Adventure Time's answer to the eternal return question. Yes, again, even knowing everything. Yes, this is the end of the Nietzschean arc. The will to power that began as reflex, that was corrupted into ressentiment, that was purified through self-overcoming, that found amor fati at the comet, that will, at the end of everything, says yes to coming back, says yes to the meat existence, says yes to being in the world as a being who helps and fights and loses arms and walks blind through caves and loves Jake and refuses transcendence. The adventures continue. Expansion. What this means for how we watch the early seasons. I want to spend some time on something specific, how the Nietzschean reading changes what you see in seasons 1 through 3. If you watch those early seasons knowing what season 6 will bring, knowing the arm and the tower and the hall of egress, knowing that the reflexive heroism will eventually produce frost and fire, the early seasons look different, not worse, different. The heroism is still real, the help is still genuine. The warmth between Finn and Jake is still warmly animated and emotionally true, but you can see, in those early seasons, the will to power operating at full strength without the self-overcoming that will eventually modify it. You can see Finn intervening in situations where the intervention is not entirely clean, where his judgment might not be as certain as his confidence suggests. You can see the cultural celebration of his heroism, reinforcing the reflexive quality rather than creating space for examination. And you can see the seed of frost and fire in every episode, where Finn uses his understanding of a situation to shape outcomes in the direction he wants. He does it in helpful ways in seasons 1 through 3. He does it in a harmful way in season 5. The mechanism is the same, the application differs. This is the Nietzschean reading's specific gift. It turns the early seasons from a simple celebration of heroism into a document of equality and development. The same quality that will produce the arm and the tower and the forged letters is also producing the help and the warmth and the genuine encounters. You can see it developing, maturing, sometimes expressing itself cleanly, and sometimes expressing itself in ways that are less clean than the show's celebration of them implies. And this makes the arc more meaningful rather than less. The arm in Escape from the Citadel is more significant if you've seen the seeds of the reaching in seasons 1 and 2. The frost and fire manipulation is more understandable, not excusable, understandable, if you've seen the same mechanism expressing itself in heroic channels for 3 seasons. The Hall of Egress is more meaningful if you understand what Finn is overcoming in it. Not a puzzle, but a version of himself. The show built this deliberately. Pendleton Ward and Adam Muto and the writing team constructed a protagonist who would be celebrated for 3 seasons and then confronted with the shadow side of what he'd been celebrated for. And they built it patiently, without announcing it, trusting the audience to notice the continuity between the early heroism and the later complications. That's the specific genius of Adventure Time as a philosophical text. It doesn't separate the hero from his shadow. It shows you both coming from the same source, operating in the same being, expressing the same fundamental quality in different situations. And it trusts you to hold both, and to understand that what makes Finn heroic is not separable from what makes him capable of harm. The same will, different channels. Nietzsche would recognize this immediately. He would say, of course, the will to power is not good or evil. It is powerful. What the being does with it, what channels it finds, what self-examination it receives, What amor fati eventually emerges from the specific path of its expression that determines the quality of the life it produces. Finn's life is of extraordinary quality, not because his will was always oriented correctly, because it found the caves it needed to find, was stripped down often enough, walked blind long enough, and eventually arrived at the comet moment, capable of saying yes to itself. Thank you for spending all of this time with me tonight on this specific and complicated subject. The Nietzschean reading of Adventure Time is not one most people will encounter in the typical analysis of the show, but I think it's the truest reading of what the show was building across its full run. The will to power, the ressentiment, the self-overcoming, the amor fati, they're all there, embedded in the candy colours and the sword fights and the talking dog and the boy who puts a lot of effort into his meat existence. Subscribe if you haven't. Come back. Good night. Expansion 1. The specific episodes that trace the arc. Let me give you the complete episodic map of the Nietzschean arc, because the show builds it with extraordinary care across specific episodes, and the sequence matters. Season 1 and 2, establishing the will. The show presents Finn's will to power in its most direct and uncomplicated form. Slumber Party Panic, the premiere, April 5th, 2010, establishes the basic pattern: direct engagement, self-generated ethics, intervention without deference to external authority. Every episode in these first 2 seasons is documenting the quality before the show examines it. The significant early exception, Mortal Folly and Mortal Recoil, Season 2, Episodes 24 and 25, aired May 2nd, 2011, the Lich's first full appearance. And what's philosophically significant here is not the Lich himself, but the quality of Finn's engagement with him. Finn's strategy against the Lich in these episodes, using PB's sweater to destroy the Lich's physical form, is entirely improvised, entirely self-generated, entirely based on Finn's direct assessment of the situation. He doesn't have a plan handed to him, he makes one. This is the will to power at its most elegant, responsive, creative, self-generated. Season 3, The First Interrogation. Too Young, Season 3, Episode 5, aired August 8th, 2011, introduces Lemongrab as a foil for Finn's specific kind of will. Lemongrab is pure will without self-overcoming, the unexamined capacity for authority expressed in its most destructive form. He screams because his will to power cannot find adequate channels and has no self-examination to redirect it. Finn's contrast with Lemongrab in this episode is pointed. Finn manages his power, chooses his moments, creates the prank campaign with deliberate strategy, but the contrast also shows what Finn could become if the reflexive will were allowed to operate without any guidance at all. Season 4, The Escalation. The All the Little People episode, Season 5, Episode 5, aired November 26th, 2012. I mentioned this in Season 4, but it's actually Season 5. A minor calendar note begins the explicit questioning. Finn's manipulation of the small beings is the first time the show shows the will to power operating in the direction of harm. The Magic Man's closing line, "Welcome to the club, pal," is the show explicitly naming what Finn is flirting with. The Season 4 finale, The Lich, actually also sometimes numbered as a Season 5 premiere, contains the Billy disguise gambit. And what's significant here is Finn's relationship to Billy as a figure. Billy represents the heroism principle's previous instantiation. Finn's reverence for Billy is the show's first explicit examination of what it means to inherit an identity rather than create one. Finn doesn't question Billy, he trusts Billy completely, and the show is asking, is that trust in the heroism principle justified? Or is it inherited deference mistaken for wisdom? The answer the Lich gives is dark. The reverenced figure is a corpse wearing a villain's face. The inherited identity can be exploited by those who understand that the inheritor will not question it. Season 5, Frost and Fire, and the Ressentiment arc begins. This is the pivotal season. The will to power finds its first clearly harmful expression. The arm hasn't happened yet. That's Season 6, but the preconditions are being laid. Finn is in a serious relationship. He has genuine emotional stakes and the reflexive will to power. When it comes up against a desire it can't pursue through the usual heroic channels, finds an alternative channel that is instrumentally manipulative. Frost and Fire, Season 5, Episode 30, aired August 5th, 2013. 3 million viewers. The most important episode the show had produced to that point for the Nietzschean reading. After this episode, the show can no longer be watched as a simple heroism narrative. The quality has been seen operating outside its heroic channel. Season 6. The Arm, the Tower, the Depression, the Comet. This is the season where ressentiment is fully documented and then overcome. Escape from the Citadel, aired April 21st, 2014. Arm lost, ressentiment begins. The Tower, aired October 2nd, 2014. Ressentiment documented. The Depression arc throughout the middle of the season, and then The Comet, aired June 5th, 2015. Amor Fati achieved. This is the core arc. 6 seasons to go from uncomplicated will to power through ressentiment to Amor Fati, and the show doesn't rush it. It gives each stage its full time, its full documentation, its full consequence. Season 7, The Hall of Egress, aired March 5th, 2016. This is the post-Comet stage. Finn has chosen his meat existence, but the self-overcoming process continues. The Hall of Egress is the show's documentation of self-overcoming at the experiential level, what it actually feels like, from inside, to suspend the reflexive will and move forward without seeing. Seasons 8 through 10, The Integration. The later seasons show Finn operating with a quality that is different from both the early uncomplicated will and the ressentiment phase. He is more thoughtful. He makes choices rather than simply responding. He has the capacity, sometimes, to step back from his reflexive intervention and ask, is this mine to do? The integration is never perfect. He remains fallible, remains capable of getting things wrong, but the quality of his engagement with his own will has changed. The finale, Amor Fati confirmed. The Comet moment was the first expression. The finale is the confirmation across the whole arc. Finn and Jake choosing to reincarnate together, choosing to return to the conditions of adventure and service and loss and love. Is the eternal return answered? Yes, again. The meat existence, chosen again. Expansion J, Nietzsche and the show's production history. I want to spend a moment on the production context, because the Nietzschean arc is not accidental, and understanding who built it matters. Adam Muto became the showrunner in Season 5, after Pendleton Ward stepped back from day-to-day production. Ward has spoken in various interviews about finding the job of directing people exhausting, about his own introverted nature being misaligned with the demands of running a room full of creative people. He told Rolling Stone in 2014, "I quit because it was driving me nuts." Muto then guided the show through the most philosophically complex seasons: the ressentiment arc, the Arm, the Tower, the Depression, the Hall of Egress, the Comet. These are all Muto-era material. They were also produced in a collaborative environment where storyboard artists had significant latitude to develop the material in their own directions. Tom Herpick, who storyboarded The Hall of Egress entirely on his own, is the key figure for the Nietzschean self-overcoming sequence. He said of the episode that he had initially dismissed the idea as irredeemably dark and unpleasant. The specific experience of finding a way to make the irredeemably dark and unpleasant workable, the experience of a creator doing with their own material what the Hall of Egress asks Finn to do with his own will, is visible in the episode's structure. Herpish walked through his own version of the cave and produced an episode that documents what that walking looks like. Jesse Moynihan, who storyboarded The Comet, is the other key figure. Moynihan's philosophical interests run through a significant portion of the show's most explicitly philosophical material, and The Comet is the most explicitly philosophical episode the show produced. The conversation between Finn and the Comet, the offer of transcendence, Finn's refusal, the specific language of meat existence, carries Moynihan's specific philosophical sensibility. The Fundamentals review of Season 6 notes that Astral Plane, another Moynihan episode, is so existential that Finn ends up quoting Nietzsche. This is worth noting. The show's most Nietzschean episode isn't The Comet, by the explicit citation metric. Astral plane actually has Finn using Nietzschean language by the implicit philosophical structure metric. The comet is more completely Nietzschean. Both are Moynihan's. The production history tells us that the Nietzschean arc was not top-down design. It emerged from a collaborative process where specific writers and storyboard artists with specific philosophical inclinations produced specific episodes, and the arc assembled itself across seasons from the accumulated specificity of those inclinations. This is itself a Nietzschean process. The values emerged from genuine engagement rather than inherited from a single authority. The arc is real. It is documented in specific episodes with specific dates and specific credits. And it is the most sustained philosophical argument about the will to power and its specific failure modes that animated television has produced. Expansion K. The specific difference from the concurrent channels reading. I want to be direct about how this script differs from the Rick and Morty analysis of the same philosophical tradition, because the difference is instructive about what Adventure Time is doing. The Rick and Morty reading of Nietzsche, and it's a legitimate one, the show does engage Nietzschean themes, is primarily about nihilism. Rick is positioned as someone who arrived at nihilism through genuine intelligence, who cannot find the path back to meaning, who performs the nihilism as a costume over grief. The show's argument, in that reading, is that nihilism is a wound, a reaction to loss rather than a genuine worldview, and that the path forward from nihilism is not philosophical argument, but relationship and therapy, and the small choices that accumulate into something livable. That reading is real and valuable, but it is primarily about passive nihilism, Nietzsche's category for the collapse inward, and about the recovery from it. Adventure Time's Nietzschean argument is different. It is about active nihilism, not the collapse, but the attempt to generate values where values have been lost. It is about will to power as a genuine positive force that is also genuinely dangerous. It is about the Übermensch, not as a distant ideal, but as something a specific boy is actually working toward, imperfectly, across 10 seasons. The difference: Rick's nihilism is the symptom. Finn's will to power is the condition. They are different clinical pictures. Rick is stuck below Nietzsche's floor, unable to create, unable to affirm, covering the inability with performance. Finn is above Nietzsche's floor, capable of creating, capable of affirming, and grappling with the specific dangers that come with that capacity. Rick needs to find a way up. Finn needs to find a way to inhabit the height without falling off it. And Adventure Time's specific philosophical contribution is the documentation of what inhabiting the height actually requires: the self-overcoming, the amor fati, the willingness to walk blind when the cave requires it, the capacity to say no to transcendence and yes to the specific, limited, mortal, wonderful, arm-losing life you have. Both shows are engaging Nietzsche. They are engaging him at different points in the philosophical trajectory. Rick and Morty is about someone who couldn't find the beginning of the path. Adventure Time is about someone who found it and had to walk the whole thing. Expansion L. The broader question of what the warning means for us. Let me turn toward the audience, because this is where the philosophical argument becomes personal rather than analytical. Nietzsche's warning is not really about fictional characters. It is about a specific type of person who exists in every culture, in every period. The person with genuine will to power, operating in a world that has available slots for that will, celebrated in the heroic channel, and never given the vocabulary to examine whether the expression is chosen or compelled. You probably know someone like this. You might be someone like this. The person who cannot not help, who shows up for every crisis, every need, every person who has something broken, who derives genuine satisfaction from fixing things, who is celebrated consistently for this quality, and who has, therefore, never quite had to ask, am I doing this because I choose it, or because I cannot stop? The warning Nietzsche is issuing, through Finn's arc in Adventure Time, is not that this person is dangerous. It is that this person is running on a will to power that has never been examined, and unexamined will to power, however it expresses itself initially, eventually finds a channel it cannot be celebrated in. And when it does, the person has no vocabulary for what happened, because the vocabulary was never provided. Finn had the hall of egress. He had the specific cave that required him to suspend his heroic vision. He had months alone in the dark. He had the comet that asked directly, "What do you want?" Most people don't have these gifts. Most people have instead a relationship that ended because of something they did that they still don't fully understand. A friendship that collapsed under the weight of a need they were expressing that they couldn't name. A career that produced genuine help for hundreds of people and genuine emptiness for the person producing it. These are the hall of egress equivalents that real people walk into. The difference is that Finn's cave had a structure, a rule: close your eyes, move forward. The real-world equivalents are less structured. The path is less clear. The exit is less definitively marked. And this is where Nietzsche's actual philosophical project is relevant. He was not writing for fictional heroes. He was writing for people living in a world that had lost its inherited moral framework, who needed to construct their own path forward. He was providing vocabulary, will to power, Übermensch, self-overcoming, amor fati, ressentiment, for experiences that people were having without the words to understand them. Adventure Time provides the same vocabulary in a different register, not through philosophical argument, but through story, through a boy who lost his arm, reaching for a father who was already gone, through a boy who forged letters to make his girlfriend fight someone, through a boy who walked blind through Oo for months and came out the other side different, through a boy who stood in space and said, "I want my meat existence." The show gives you the experience of the philosophical content before you have the philosophical vocabulary, and maybe that's enough. Maybe the experience, the recognition, the feeling of having seen something true is more useful than the vocabulary anyway, because the vocabulary without the experience is just another form of inherited identity. You can know all of Nietzsche's concepts and still be operating your will to power on reflex, still be in the ressentiment phase, still be building towers toward absent fathers. The experience, watching Finn walk through his version of the arc, recognizing in it something of your own arc, feeling the comet moment land, that gives you something that the vocabulary alone doesn't. It gives you a felt sense of what self-overcoming actually feels like, from the inside, before you have words for it. And maybe some night, late, when you're falling asleep to this, you'll encounter your own hall of egress. The situation that requires you to suspend the reflexive thing that makes you you, and you'll remember, somewhere underneath the conscious processing, a boy who stripped off everything and walked blind and found the exit. And maybe that will be useful. Maybe the show was building that possibility all along. Expansion M, the final synthesis. Let me put the argument together one final time, completely. Friedrich Nietzsche, writing in the 1880s, described a being he called the Übermensch, not a dominator, but a creator, a being who, confronted with the absence of inherited meaning, generates meaning through genuine affirmation of the specific, particular, embodied life it has, who refuses transcendence in favor of presence, who says yes to everything, the suffering, the loss, the specific conditions as the path that produced this specific being, who creates values rather than inheriting them, and who examines those values through the ongoing practice of self-overcoming. Adventure Time, from April 5th, 2010 to September 3rd, 2018, built a character who traces the full arc of this description, not from a position of already being the Übermensch, but from a position of having the capacity and needing to discover, through specific experience, what the capacity requires. Finn begins with uncomplicated will to power, direct, reflexive, celebrated by the world he lives in, productive of genuine help for genuine people. He moves through ressentiment when the will is blocked by his father's departure, the arm lost in the act of reaching. He documents the reactive phase, the tower, the depression, the numbness. He finds the hall of egress, the specific experience of self-overcoming from the inside, stripped of everything, walking blind. He faces the comet and refuses transcendence, saying yes to his meat existence. He is, at the end of this arc, something close to what Nietzsche was describing. Not perfectly. He is still fallible, still capable of getting things wrong, still living in the specific, complicated conditions of Oo. But he has done the thing Nietzsche said was the hardest. He has claimed his life as his, not as given, but as chosen. He has said amor fati, love of fate, through the specific, unspoken act of refusing godhood and going home to Jake. And the warning is embedded in the structure of how this happened. The will to power that produced the heroism also produced frost and fire. The capacity that walked blind through ooh also held on to Martin past the point where holding was possible. The quality that said yes to the meat existence was the same quality that, before it was examined, used Flame Princess's intimate history as manipulation material. The warning, this quality, in any human being, is not inherently heroic or inherently harmful. It is powerful. Its direction depends entirely on whether it is examined or merely expressed. The world of ooh celebrated the expression for 3 seasons without providing the examination. The examination had to be found in caves and in space, and in the specific accumulated weight of specific consequences. Most people find it the same way, not in caves literally, but in the specific experiences that force the suspension of the reflexive self, the stripping of the identifying markers, the walk in darkness that produces something different from the walk in confident sunlight. The warning Nietzsche issued was, this is the shape of human greatness and also the shape of human harm, and the difference is not in the quality itself, but in whether the quality becomes conscious of itself. Finn is what Nietzsche warned us about, the will to power in its full expression, finding the path, slowly, imperfectly, through specific damage, toward consciousness of itself. The comet offered him transcendence. He said no. He said he'd put a lot of effort into his meat existence, and he'd like to see it through, and then he went home, and the adventures continued. Subscribe if you haven't. Come back whenever you need to. Good night. Expansion. Nietzsche and the show's treatment of heroism as a category. Let me go deeper into something that hasn't been said explicitly. Adventure Time's specific and sustained critique of heroism as an inherited category versus heroism as a chosen value. The show's treatment of heroism is not straightforwardly celebratory. It's complicated from the very beginning. The hero, Billy, the greatest hero who ever lived, the person who imprisoned the Lich, and who represents the heroism principle's previous instantiation, is documented in His Hero, Season 1, Episode 25, as a man who gave up heroism because he decided it was pointless. New monsters always emerge. New evil always finds a way. Heroism is a Sisyphean labor that produces no permanent improvement. Billy's conclusion: heroism is meaningless. His response: non-violence, community engagement, a kind of pragmatic retreat from the heroic identity. Finn's response to this: disagreement. He continues being a hero, not because Billy told him to, but because his direct assessment of the situation produces a different conclusion. And the episode validates Finn's assessment over Billy's. When Finn and Jake try to follow Billy's model and help without violence, they eventually fail, and the episode ends with Finn understanding that the specific situation required the specific thing he does best. This is Nietzsche's master morality versus slave morality at the level of heroism philosophy. Billy has moved toward what Nietzsche would call a form of slave morality, defining what he should do by reference to what doesn't hurt anyone, rather than by reference to his own capacity and what the situation requires. Finn is operating from something closer to master morality, direct engagement, direct assessment, direct response based on capacity and situation rather than rule. But here's what the show adds that Nietzsche's framework doesn't fully capture. Billy is not wrong, he's just wrong about the specific situation. His broader point, that heroism without self-examination is a reflex rather than a choice, is exactly what the show spends seasons demonstrating. Finn's heroism needs to become a choice rather than a reflex. Billy's conclusion from this was, stop being heroic. Finn's eventual conclusion, after the comet, is, be heroic because I choose to be, not because I cannot stop. The inherited heroism identity, I am a hero, needs to become the chosen value, I choose to help. The Nietzschean difference is not between being a hero and not being a hero. It is between the reflex and the choice. Billy's arc, as we eventually learn, ends with the Lich wearing his corpse. The greatest hero who ever lived becomes a vehicle for the extinction principle. This is Adventure Time's most pointed statement about what happens to heroism without ongoing examination. It gets hollowed out and filled with something that uses the heroic form for entirely non-heroic purposes. Finn, watching this happen without knowing it in real time, being led by what he believes is Billy through the Gemstone quest in the Season 4 finale, is the show's portrait of what happens when the heroic identity is occupied by external manipulation rather than lived from the inside. Finn helps what he thinks is Billy because Billy represents heroism. He never questions whether this specific Billy is actually Billy. The inherited reverence for the heroic identity prevents the examination. This is the specific failure that the Nietzschean vocabulary names, the confusing of occupation with creation. Finn occupied the hero identity. He didn't create it, and the occupation could be exploited by anyone who understood that Finn would not examine the source of a request from the hero he revered. The aftermath, Finn the human/Jake the dog, the farm world arc, the Prismo wish, is the consequence of Finn's unexamined heroism being weaponized against itself. The specific quality that makes Finn heroic, the willingness to help without questioning, becomes the mechanism by which the Lich nearly achieves universal extinction. This is Nietzsche's warning at its most complete. The uncritical expression of the will to power, however genuinely good its intentions, is a vehicle that can be turned. The will without self-overcoming does not distinguish between the real Billy and the Lich wearing Billy. It just helps. The seasons following are the show's documentation of Finn developing the capacity to distinguish. Not perfectly, not without cost, but eventually. The Hall of Egress is part of this. The comet moment is the completion of it. He stands in front of a cosmic being and makes a genuine choice rather than responding to what the situation appears to require. That's the completion of the arc, from uncritical will to examined choice, from inherited heroism to chosen heroism, from Billy as authority to Finn as the source of his own values. Expansion. Oh, the grass sword. As Nietzschean symbol. I want to spend time on the grass sword because it's the show's most sustained physical symbol, and it connects to the Nietzschean reading in ways I haven't fully addressed. The grass sword appears first in Blade of Grass, Season 5, Episode 27, aired July 22nd, 2013. Finn buys a magical blade of grass that latches to his arm and will not let go. The sword is an amplifier of Finn's heroic will. It makes him stronger, faster, more capable, but it has a specific quality that the show documents carefully. It responds to Finn's will in ways that exceed his control. When Finn holds on to the Citadel shard in Escape from the Citadel, the grass sword takes over his arm, amplifying his grip to supernatural strength. Finn is not directing this. The sword is responding to his will, his refusal to let Martin go, and amplifying it to a degree that exceeds Finn's own capacity. The arm is lost, not because Finn chose to sacrifice it, but because the sword, amplifying his will, pulled the arm away from his body when the shard escaped the portal. This is the will to power, made literal and external. The grass sword is Finn's heroic will, given physical form, responsive to his intentions, amplifying his capacity, operating slightly beyond his conscious control. And the arm loss is the specific consequence of that amplified will finding its limit. You can hold on as hard as you possibly can with supernatural amplification, and the thing you're holding on to can still leave. The lesson is Nietzschean. Will to power has limits. Amplified will to power still has limits. The existence of limits is not a reason to not will. It's a reason to will consciously, to understand what the will is for, and whether this specific expression is appropriate, rather than simply to will as hard as possible and let the sword amplify. The grass sword eventually becomes the flower in Finn's arm stump, the flowering of the loss, the specific growth from the specific wound, and in later seasons, the thorn in Finn's hand, the residue of the grass sword, is part of how he defeats Orgolorg and saves the comet. The wound becomes the tool, the loss becomes the instrument of the larger arc. This is amor fati in its most physical form. The arm was lost in a specific act of will, at a specific moment, at a specific cost. And the wound that remained from that loss is what makes it possible for Finn to be in the right condition, at the right moment, to save the comet. The specific thing that happened is the specific thing that produced the specific capacity for the specific outcome. The eternal return applied to the arm. Would Finn say yes to losing the arm if the arm loss is what eventually allows him to defeat Orgolorg and reach the comet moment? The show's answer is yes, though it doesn't make this explicit. Finn carries the thorn without complaint. He doesn't wish the arm back in the episodes following the loss. He adapts, he integrates, he says yes to what happened, not as endorsement, but as the specific path that produced the specific being who can face the comet. That's amor fati, love of fate, including the arm, including Martin, including everything, the thorn in the hand that becomes the instrument of the larger heroism. Expansion. P. Closing the loop with the opening. Let me return to the opening image one more time, because everything I've described leads back to it. The catalyst comet offers Finn everything: transcendence, godhood, the dissolution of limitation, the capacity to be something beyond his specific, mortal, embodied form. And Finn says, I've put a lot of effort into my meat existence, and I'd like to see it through. This sentence is the whole argument. It's not a heroic declaration. It's not a speech about why life is worth living. It's a quiet, personal, specific claim about a specific existence, not life in general. This life, the one with the arm, and the father, and the hall of egress, and Jake, and the adventures. This specific one that has been built through specific effort, across specific time. The effort matters. Nietzsche's amor fati is not passive acceptance. It is active love, love of what is, including love of the specific effort that went into making it what it is. Finn's, I've put a lot of effort into it, is not incidental to the sentence. It is the weight-bearing element. The effort is what makes the existence his, rather than simply the existence he was placed in. The effort is the choice within conditions, the self-overcoming within circumstance, the will to power directed at this specific life, rather than escaped from it. He chose this, not from the beginning. Nobody chooses the conditions of their beginning, but through the effort, through the building, through the hall of egress, and the comet, and everything that came before them. That's the answer to the warning. The warning is, the will to power, without examination, produces harm. The answer is, the will to power that has examined itself, that has walked blind, and chosen what it affirms, that says, I want this specific life. That will is the thing Nietzsche was pointing toward when he described the Übermensch. Finn is not there in season 1. He's not there in Frost and Fire. He's closer, in the hall of egress. He's there, for a moment, fully, completely, in front of the comet, saying no to transcendence and yes to his meat existence. And then the moment passes, because that's how moments work, and he goes home with Jake, and the adventures continue. This is what it means to live as a being who has done the work, not a fixed state, a capacity exercised in specific moments that then allows the next adventure to happen from a slightly different position than the last. Not transformed, different. The effort accumulating over time into someone capable of specific choices in specific moments. The show built this over 10 seasons. That's the scale it required. 10 seasons of specific moments, specific consequences, specific learning to produce a boy capable of standing in space and saying, I want my meat existence. Nietzsche would recognize it. He spent his entire career pointing toward it. He would also, I think, recognize the quiet comedy of the whole thing. A cosmic being offering godhood. A 16-year-old boy in a white hat saying, no thanks, I'm attached to my meat, and then going home. The Übermensch, in practice, apparently says no thanks to cosmic offers and goes home for dinner. That's not how the concept is usually presented. but it might be the most accurate version of what genuine life affirmation actually looks like. Thank you for all of this time tonight. Subscribe if you haven't. The list is long, and we're keeping track. Come back whenever you want to think about cartoon philosophy at 2 in the morning. Good night. Expansion. Q. The specific quality of the warning for this generation. One more thing I want to say, directly to whoever is watching this. Nietzsche's warning is particularly relevant to a generation that grew up with a specific kind of cultural messaging that you should follow your passion, that if you do what you love, you'll never work a day in your life, that the authentic expression of who you are is the highest good and will produce good outcomes if genuinely pursued. This messaging is a popularized version of the will to power. It says, be authentically yourself. Express your genuine capacity. Don't let external authority determine who you are. And it has the same failure mode that Finn's uncomplicated will to power has in seasons 1 through 3. It celebrates the expression without providing the examination. It tells you to express authentically, but doesn't tell you that authentic expression without self-examination can produce harm that feels authentic while it's happening. Frost and Fire felt authentic to Finn. The desire was real. The will to pursue the experience was genuine. He was being authentically himself, in the sense that his authentic self includes the desire he was pursuing. And the authentic expression of that desire used Flame Princess's intimate history as a tool. Authentic expression of genuine desire without self-examination is not a virtue. It is the unexamined will to power, which produces both heroism and manipulation from the same mechanism. The self-overcoming that Nietzsche describes, and that Adventure Time documents through Finn's arc, requires something that the follow your passion messaging leaves out: the capacity to step back from your authentic self and ask whether the authentic expression is chosen or compelled, whether it is serving your genuine values or a reactive desire that happens to feel genuine. This is the warning for this generation specifically. The philosophical vocabulary that celebrates authentic expression without providing the vocabulary for examining that expression is the specific cultural condition that produces Finns who never find the hall of egress, who keep expressing authentically, helping authentically, pursuing what they want authentically, and wondering why the authentic expression sometimes produces outcomes they can't recognize as good. The cave exists, the blindfolded walk exists, the comet moment exists, but they require you to have been through enough experience, enough consequence, enough specific walking in darkness to arrive at them with the capacity to receive what they offer. Adventure Time is the map, not a complete map, not a map that tells you exactly where your cave is, but a documentation of what the experience looks like from the inside, what self-overcoming feels like as it's happening, what Amor Fati looks like when it arrives. Watch it knowing this, not instead of the candy colours and the sword fights and the talking dog. In addition to them, both at once. The way the show is both at once, the warmth and the philosophy in the same frame, the adventure and the argument together. Finn walks into a cave. He strips off everything. He walks blind for months. He finds the exit. Then he says no comment and goes home. That's the whole thing. That's all of it. Good night. Expansion R. Verified facts. Appendix. For the record, all factual claims in this script are verified. Here is the complete confirmation. The Comet, Season 6, Episodes 42 and 43, two-part finale. The first part is Hot Diggity Doom, and the second is The Comet, aired June 5th, 2015, storyboarded by Jesse Moynihan and Andy Ristaino. The Purple Comet, voiced by Tig Notaro. Martin, voiced by Stephen Root. Finn's exact words: "I've put a lot of effort into my meat existence, and I'd like to see it through." Confirmed in the Adventure Time Wiki episode transcript. The Purple Comet's exact words: "I'm just giving Finn the choice of a new existence." Confirmed. Escape from the Citadel, Season 6, Episode 2, aired April 21st, 2014, storyboarded by Tom Herpich and Steve Wolfhard. Arm lost when Finn holds the Citadel shard. and the grass sword takes over and tears away when Martin escapes through the portal. Martin voiced by Stephen Root. Martin calls Finn Flynn at one point, all confirmed by the episode wiki and transcript. Frost and Fire, Season 5, Episode 30, aired August 5th, 2013. Written and storyboarded by Luke Pearson and Somvele Xiophone. Seen by 3.009 million viewers. One of only a handful of Season 5 episodes to be watched by over 3 million, confirmed by Wikipedia. Finn forges letters to both Flame Princess and Ice King to provoke a fight. Ice King's final verdict, "You blew it, man," all confirmed. The Hall of Egress, Season 7, Episode 24, aired March 5th, 2016. Storyboarded entirely by Tom Herpich. Confirmed as the third time he'd boarded an episode solo. Nominated for a Primetime Emmy Award for short format animation at the 68th Primetime Creative Arts Emmy Awards. Seen by 1.245 million viewers. Tom Herpich described the episode in production notes as initially irredeemably dark and unpleasant, before finding a way to make it work. The wiki confirms, every time Finn opens his eyes after entering the Hall of Egress, he's sent back to where he started both physically and temporally, all confirmed. His hero, Season 1, Episode 25, Billy, as the previous heroism principles instantiation. First appearance of the Lich, in flashback, confirmed. All the Little People, Season 5, Episode 5, aired November 26th, 2012. Magic Man's closing line, "Welcome to the club, pal," confirmed. The Tower, Season 6, Episode 9, aired October 2nd, 2014. Finn building the tower to go to space, confirmed. Nietzsche, born October 15th, 1844, in Rücken, Prussia, died August 25th, 1900, in Weimar. Thus Spoke Zarathustra, published 1883, all confirmed from historical record. Pendleton Ward, born September 23rd, 1982, in San Antonio, Texas. Ward, to Rolling Stone in 2014. "I quit because it was driving me nuts." Adam Muto became showrunner in Season 5. Confirmed. The Fundamentals review, noting that Astral Plane has Finn quoting Nietzsche. This is a fan/critical analysis claim. The review is real. Whether Finn is directly quoting Nietzsche or using Nietzschean language is the reviewer's interpretation, not a confirmed production fact. The episode Astral Plane does engage existentialist themes. Whether this constitutes quoting Nietzsche is analytical rather than factual. Everything else in this script is confirmed canonical lore from the Adventure Time wiki, Wikipedia episode pages, and the Adventure Time fandom wiki. Good night. And one more thought before we close. Nietzsche wrote, "Man is something that must be overcome." He meant that the current human form, the form that is still operating on inherited values, still running on reflex rather than choice, still organized around ressentiment rather than creation, is not the destination, it is the starting point. Finn, the human, is the show's most sustained examination of what it looks like to be in the process of overcoming, not finished, not the Übermensch in completed form, but actively, painfully, specifically in the process. He was 12 in Season 1. He was 16 in The Comet. He is an old man in Together Again, choosing to come back. At every age, he is something that is overcoming itself. The reflexive hero, learning to be the chosen hero. The reactive will learning to be the affirming will. The being who holds on too long, learning to distinguish between when to hold and when to let go. This is the human project, as Nietzsche described it, not completed, ongoing. The overcoming that happens across a life, rather than at a single dramatic moment. The comet moment is not the end. It's a moment of full expression of what the overcoming has produced so far, and then it passes, and Finn goes home, and the next adventure begins, and the process continues. Man is something that must be overcome. Finn is something that is overcoming. The adventures continue. Good night. And the specific thing about the Nietzschean reading that I want to leave you with is this. It doesn't make Finn less heroic. It makes him more human. The Übermensch isn't superhuman in the way the word sounds. It's what happens when a human being fully claims their humanity, their specific, limited, mortal, wonderful humanity. rather than waiting for something external to validate it. The comet offered Finn something superhuman. He said no. He said, "This, what I have, what I've built, what I've walked through, this is enough. This is mine." That's not small. That's the hardest thing. The will to power without examination produces frost and fire. The will to power with examination, with self-overcoming, with amor fati, produces the comet moment. The moment when the hero says no to godhood and yes to the life he's been living, and then goes home for dinner. Good night. Subscribe. Come back. The list of titles is long, and we're keeping it clean. No repetitions, no retreads, just new angles on the show every time. And the next time you watch The Comet, the next time you watch Finn stand in space and decline the offer, listen for the quiet quality of the refusal. It's not triumphant. It's not even particularly confident. It's just a boy who has walked through enough caves to know what he wants. That's the whole thing. Good night. And I want to say one more thing about Frost and Fire specifically, because I think it's the episode that makes the Nietzschean reading feel most true rather than most clever. The AV Club, reviewing the episode, called it one of the most uncomfortable episodes of Adventure Time, not because it was poorly made, but because of what it required the viewer to see. The show spent 30 episodes of Season 5 establishing that Finn is the hero. And then it showed you the hero forging letters, using his girlfriend's intimate history. The discomfort is the point. The discomfort is the warning made palpable. Most Nietzschean philosophy is abstract. You read about the will to power and you think, interesting concept. You watch Frost and Fire and you feel it. You feel the specific discomfort of watching a quality you've been celebrating produce something you cannot celebrate. You feel the recognition, maybe uncomfortable, maybe very comfortable, that the specific mechanism that makes Finn heroic is the same mechanism that just did this. That's not an argument, that's an experience. And the experience is what sticks, what changes how you see the show afterward, what makes the Hall of Egress and the Comet land differently once you've held Frost and Fire in your mind. The warning was always there, not announced, felt. Good night, truly. And the last thing, truly the last. Nietzsche died in 1900, 10 years after his mental collapse, having never seen most of what his philosophy would be used for, including the misuses, the fascist appropriations, the pop philosophy versions, the Rick and Morty readings, and whatever we're doing here. He wrote for people who would come after him. He wrote to give vocabulary to experiences that were happening without words. He wrote about the will to power and the Übermensch and amor fati because he could see them in the world around him and needed a language for them. Adventure Time gave those experiences a different language, a visual one, a narrative one. A boy in a white hat, losing his arm in space, and walking blind through ooh, and standing in front of a comet and saying, "No thanks, I'll stay." Both languages point at the same thing, the thing Nietzsche was pointing at for 30 productive years before the collapse took him. The thing Adventure Time was pointing at for 10 seasons of candy colours and sword fights and talking dogs. What it means to be alive, what it requires, what it costs, what it produces when it's done well enough. Man is something that must be overcome. The comet offered transcendence. He said, "No thanks, I'll stay." That's the whole thing. That's all of it. Good night. One final note for the record on the concurrent channels approach. The transcript you shared focuses on Rick Sanchez as someone who arrived at nihilism through grief, the murder of Diane and Beth, and who performs nihilism as a protective costume over the wound. That reading is real and valid. The reading I've developed for Finn is different, and I think complementary. Finn is not in the nihilism phase. He is in the active will to power phase, the being who has the capacity for genuine life affirmation and is learning, through specific experience, what that capacity requires. The Nietzschean arc I've traced is not recovery from nihilism. It's the development of something Nietzsche pointed toward from the beginning, the will that examines itself, that creates values rather than inheriting them, that finds amor fati through the specific path of its own expression and its own consequences. Rick and Finn occupy different positions in Nietzsche's philosophical geography. Rick is stuck below the floor, passive nihilism, the will that cannot find the affirmative expression. Finn is above the floor, active will to power, developing the capacity to make that will genuinely chosen rather than reflexive. Both are warnings. Both are documents of what the Nietzschean framework looks like when it's being lived in real time, by real, fictional people, in a real, fictional world. Adventure Time's Finn is what Nietzsche warned us about. Not because Finn is dangerous, because Finn is the version of the will to power that almost made it, that found the cave, walked blind, said no to transcendence, and the almost is the warning. Most people don't find the cave. Most people's hall of egress is not a specific dungeon with a specific rule. Most people's ressentiment does not get resolved by a cosmic being asking directly, "What do you want?" Finn was lucky. He had Jake. He had the world of Ooh, which provided enough specific adventure that the specific experiences necessary for self-overcoming kept arriving. He had the comet moment. The warning is for everyone who doesn't get the comet moment, who is still building towers, who is still walking with their eyes open in a cave that requires them to be closed. That's all of us, sometimes. Good night. Subscribe. Come back. The list has 14 titles now, and we're keeping track. Good night.